everyone. The next 45 minutes will be about the public perception. We have talked about it before today. Now we will deep dive in this one. Before we begin, I would like you to find Menti once again, because you have to enter the code. Again, we have some problems, but now it should be online again. So find menti.com and please access with this code. And we are going to use Menti right now because I need your help. I need you to describe your personal perception of the gambling industry with one word. Your personal perception of the gambling industry. Misunderstood? Lots of different words. These are your words. Now we will expand the horizon with the help from NEPA. They have made research and analysis which will give us a wider picture of the public perception of the online gambling industry. Sam Richardson will present the key findings. After that, the general manager in Denmark for Kindred Group, Kim Olesen, and Niels Erik Folman, CEO in Danske Licensspil, also an operator in the Danish market, will comment on these key findings. And the same will Sarah Holloway. But first, welcome to you, Sam.
Thank you very much. First of all, just explain who I am and why I'm here. I work with NEPA. We specialise in consumer science. Now, consumer science is a buzzword way of saying we try to understand consumer behaviour, and we do that across different sectors. We work with FMCG clients, the likes of Unilever, Coca-Cola, to understand buying decisions and their journey to actually purchase the product. Media companies, the likes of HBO and Sky, to understand perception of programs and new ideas and that sort of thing. And we also work in the gambling industry as well to track brand awareness, associations, that sort of thing as well. So what we're going to try and do for you is bring a view of not just the gambling industry and perception, but some ideas and some research that we've got from other sectors as well, to see what we can learn from them and obviously bring towards the gambling industry. So if I'm working this right. A common thing that we've heard so far this morning, trust. Okay, we are facing a challenge for trust across all areas of society. We see it every day with politics, media, our friends in America, President Trump, bringing that all into question. But it also spans how we interact with brands and how we make our buying decisions. The topic of trust is everywhere. We are trust ranked as individuals and as corporate entities, from social media to career websites. Everywhere in everything that we interact with involves trust. In China, and this is from USA Today, China will assign each of its citizens a trust score as part of its social credit system by 2020. It's here. We rely on trust to make our decisions. Edelman Research recently did a trust index monitor earlier in 2019. And they broke it down into 3 key areas that drive why people trust brands. Okay, my product experience is clearly key. The big one that certainly spans my history before working with NEPA, my customer experience. People say that that's always key to developing, engendering trust. But actually, the number one coming through is your impact on society, reflecting a lot of the things that we've heard already today. There is a huge expectation on brands from consumers. Okay, things are changing. You can't just do those basics. That's what we've heard so far this morning. Richard Edelman, the CEO of Edelman, brought it together quite neatly. It's time for brands to take the next giant step. They must accept responsibility conferred by consumers, welcoming greater accountability and measurement of their impact. Now that's absolutely key, and that spans every single element of our day-to-day lives. Following a similar vein, Accenture Research developed something called the Competitor Agility Index, and that's looking at the competitiveness of businesses. This was research that was done over 2.5 years, I think. It spanned across 7,000 different organizations, across 20 different sectors. It's something like 120 something completely different industries. And what they looked at is the growth, profitability, sustainability, and trust, and how they affect that competitive agility, how that affects the competitiveness of those brands. What they determined is that trust disproportionately affects a customer's competitive agility index. It makes them more competitive. Most importantly, though, and it's something that Henrik mentioned earlier on, and why it's very relevant, certainly in the gambling industry as well, it's not just about doing the right thing, it's important for the bottom line as well. Okay? Now, they modelled, using this data, they modelled a drop in trust perception across a whole range of sectors. And we've got them broken down. I mean, just the headline, a 2-point drop in trust delivers a drop in revenue of just under 6%. That's what their model is saying. But there's certain sectors, the likes of banking, which we know rely very much or very heavily on trust, are disproportionately influenced by that trust perception. Unfortunately, gambling isn't broken down in this, but I would probably assert that gambling would probably be on the left-hand side of that chart. And when day-to-day, as I said, in terms of mainstream media, cases of gambling industry being involved or highlighted on front-page news, we've got some examples there of BBC News. Our Swedish regulator colleague that spoke earlier alluded to some challenges that have been going on in the Swedish industry and them cracking down on certain brands. We had the situation with Ninja Casino, or Global Gaming rather, losing their license. But we, as part of our research for NEPA, I said we work with gambling brands as well, but we've done some research for the last 3 years measuring perception of the gambling industry. It was a much bigger piece of research, but part of it was, what is your question that we asked everybody, what is your overall perception of the gambling and betting industry? And the proportion rating is positive. Spanned 3 countries, and this is research from January 2019. Interestingly, based on where we are, Denmark's scoring lowest. Okay, so this is looking at population as a whole. We break it down into online gamblers, and we break it down into some other sections in a moment, which I'll come on to. Most positive out of those 3 markets is the UK, but that's still relatively low. General population, only 35% rating it positively. Online gamblers have a slightly better perception, but I say that that's still quite a challenging position for the industry to be in. Looking at that historically and breaking that down, we've got 3 data points for Sweden. It's going the wrong way. We've got 2 data points for Denmark. We've only conducted the research in 2019 and 2018. But when we look at online gamblers and also the population figure dropping from 27% down to 13% having a positive view on the industry. In the UK, where it's gambling is much more ingrained in society, certainly much more culturally accepted, I'd say. It's certainly higher than those two markets, but it's still down at 51% for online gamblers and only 35% with a positive view amongst the general population. So what can we do to learn from other businesses and how can we turn that around? That's critical. We, as part of our research ongoing, we measure trust. Trust is clearly becoming a key element across the whole industry. And if we're going to move things on and boost things and boost the perception and develop a sustainable industry, clearly something's got to be done to drive that trust. Even in the UK, we said it was very high, or higher compared to other markets. UK Gambling Commission do lots and lots of research, and they've tracked it for a long time, so back all the way from 2008. It's a slightly different measure from what we were looking at before, but those that agree that in this country gambling is conducted fairly and can be trusted, it was going okay until sort of 2012, and then it's gone down, 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 down. And that's in a market where there is a much more general social acceptance of the industry. Now, we talked, or there was mention earlier on about having a sustainable industry as well. We not only look at population, online gamblers, but we break it down into some other groups as well. And if the industry is to survive, is to grow and be sustainable, obviously we have that payback to potential investors, to potential employees as well. And I know it was mentioned before about attracting and retaining the best people within the industry. That's certainly a real challenge as well. And what we'll be doing as part of our continued research is obviously monitoring that, and with the sorts of items that we saw earlier from what Derby County are doing and all the other items that are going through to really change that perception and do some societal good. The idea is hopefully that will turn around that perception in the industry. Heidi?
Thank you. Then I would like Niels-Erik Foldman from the Danske Spil to come up here. And the General Manager in Denmark for Kindred Group, Kim Olesen, please enter the stage.
Thank you.
First, I would like to ask you, what does the public perception mean to you as a responsible in the gambling industry?
Well, definitely it means a lot, and as it appears right from this analysis, no brand that wants to connect with so many consumers as we want to connect to will be able to survive in the game if we don't have a trust in our brand and a trust in the way we run our business. So it's very important for us. From my side, and I represent Danske Spil, and we are government-owned. We even add to that at least the notion of being a little more responsible or a little more front runners on this part as well. So responsibility and brand trust goes hand in hand, and it's very important to us.
Kim?
I think for us, we've been talking about this during the day, and I think trust, looking at these numbers, that's clearly something that we take quite serious. And for Denmark specifically, we have lots of work to do. I think that for us, we need to talk more about how we contribute to the society, what good we do to the society, and we definitely need to talk about the good stories. We've talked about these things earlier, that there is a tendency to have a lot of negative stories out there, and this is something we're suffering from.
So why is it so difficult to communicate these good stories?
I think there's a couple of reasons. I think one is that half of the adult population don't really know the product or the entertainment service that we're actually offering. So they don't really know what it feels like, and they haven't experienced it themselves. So that's, to begin with, something that we need to focus on, to actually talk to that segment as well, people that actually don't necessarily know the product that we're offering. The second thing is that we need to be more transparent about what we do and how we try to help potential problem gamblers.
We had a headline up there before on one of Sam's slides which said, perception is declining across all markets. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's related to the quality and the frequency, among other things, of our advertising. Come on, guys, our advertising stinks. 95% is rubbish. It's really, really bad ads, promoting the same kind of wheels of fortune or the same parameters, the same ideas about it. And then I have to say to my colleague here, a few of us are trying to actually to stick out from the crowd and make some ads that also has an element of entertainment. So I think that perception is also related to the character of our ads and the frequency. I have to say that if you watch football on a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday afternoon, if you are able to stick there for 6 hours, like I did this weekend, I do see the same ads quite a lot of times, and I have to acknowledge that I think we have come to a point where it's difficult to build trust when you're just repeating and repeating and repeating the same ads again.
So what should you do?
Make better ads. And invest in that as well. But also that we have been trying to do that actually, to come up with some kind of common interest in limiting the very, very high frequency on just running the same ads. And then I have to say, well, if we can't do that on a voluntary basis, I think we need to look at how we can actually set up a framework so that everybody will still have a strong and free competition, but that we then at the same time maybe can come up with a framework where we will not make our consumers so tired of watching our ads or seeing our ads.
Kim?
Well, to a large extent, I really agree with Niels. I think that we have a history as an industry, and with me mainly focusing on Denmark, of not really being that conscious about what kind of communication we put out there. We've been very focused on price. We've been very focused on bonus messaging. And I think partly that is the reason why we are in the place we are today as an industry. Then I would agree that we are a number of operators that has decided a couple of years back that we need to do things differently. And that is a journey we're on right now. But we still suffer from a lot of advertisement that is very, very genetic. So it looks the same, it feels the same, and it's very difficult for the consumer, even the ones that knows our products, to differentiate which one is what.
Isn't it just a bad excuse?
Partly you can say it's a bad excuse, but I think ultimately we are in an industry that offers entertainment. We've talked about that during the day. We are also in an industry that really tries to set the pace for entertainment in a different way than maybe what you know from Netflix or other types of products. So we need to get our message out there. We need to talk about the products that we have. But we have not been focusing, I think, enough on the actual products, and we've been too focusing on the price.
But at the same time, I think at least when it comes to Denmark, I'm not that familiar with the other countries, but at least when it comes to Denmark, when you have an industry with clearly high profits, at least in the beginning, we have to remember we're in the early stages. We were liberalized in 2012, so we're still in the early stages, and we see a lot of profit coming in. And we do have some, you could say, large interest groups that are against industry with that heavy profit going up with double-digit growth. And I have to say, I just had that question last week when I did a presentation, because one from the audience had read that one of our colleagues in England had taken out 250 million pounds in an annual bonus for herself. And I just have to say that doesn't really help in understanding. At least, well, I don't have that kind of salary package. I don't know about you, kid, but it really doesn't help if you have that notion and perception as well that everybody in the industry are just driving big cars, smoking cigars, and making a lot of money.
It's so easy to point fingers, but I want to put you two in the same boat, and I want to let's use esport as an example, because Kim, you are a heavy sponsor for Astralis in Kindred Group, one of the most famous teams in esport. It is adored by children and young people, and I want you to mention an episode about a month ago for you, Niels Erik, when the Danish newspaper Berlingske told that you on Twitter, not you personally, but your firm, communicated about odds on esport with children and young people. I know that you apologized afterwards. But my question to both of you is, how do you think that a sponsorship on a team glorified by children and young people, and the Twitter episode will affect the public perception?
I can kick off. I think it's a fair question in terms of Astralis. It's an important partner for us. It's an interesting cooperation we have with this esports team. We've been doing a lot of thinking before entering such a partnership, as we do with all partnerships. And one of the absolute sort of decisions that we needed to get to before saying yes or no was what does the data look like? And what we can see is that it's, to a certain extent, or to a far extent, it's perceived as a sport that primarily is consumed and viewed by underage children. That is not the case. It is 10% of the people that view esports today that is below 18 globally.
It's still 10%.
Yeah, but still, if you would try to just transfer that into football or sports, or pretty much any other category, you most likely would see an even higher number. So for us, it has been very, very important to secure that when we do such a partnership, that we find a partner where we don't get exposed with our logo, where there are more than half of the exposures that are going towards underage people. And that's been important for us. One example of that is also that if we do jerseys with Astralis, we won't sell them with our logo on if it's in the sizes for children. Just to give you an example. So we really try to think through the process to secure that we don't sit in a situation where we expose our service, our logo, to underage. But of course, there will be some below 18 that will see the Unibet logo in this case. But we're very, very strict with that. And the cooperation with Astralis is founded on us not getting exposed in areas on social media where there is a majority of underage.
And Niels Ulrik, I know you apologized, as I said, and you have promised that it will never happen again.
Never.
You will never communicate about odds on esports on any social media with the children and young people. But how do you think that an episode like this affects the public perception?
Well, I'm sure that it fuels the bad perception or the misperception of how we actually do our things. And I had no other choice than just to apologize for having this small hole with our Twitter account. Now we have made the age blocking on that as well, so we should be safe now. But I agree with Kim that this is, I think esport has become some kind of a very fancy way of describing how we actually potentially attack the young ones. Because I see that we have exactly the same responsibility when we go into Superliga in football or in handball or volleyball or wherever we might be, basketball, is that we need to protect the best we can any person under 18 from gambling, from the online part that you actually cannot have an account if you're not 18, and you have to go through that with your NemID when you make that account. But also when we advertise, not just for the jerseys, but also when we try to actually segment our messages around our brand and our offerings, I think it's very important that we do our best to make sure that we stay that above 18.
Thank you. And for the last question, before we call up Sarah again, I would like to know, only 13% is positive of the Danish population, 22 in Sweden, better in UK, but still declining. Are you surprised about these numbers?
Well, it means that only 87% are neutral or negative, so no, I am surprised. I wouldn't imagine that it was such a low number. I mean that in a lot of ways, especially also when we have our sponsorships, when we have our partnerships, that we actually feel that there is a lot of positive vibes about our industry as well. That people actually think that when they place a bet on a football match, that it's part of the game and it makes it more exciting. And I think that, well, maybe it's because it's from our perspective and in my position that I get those kind of positive feedback, is that 13% is very low. And if you can make that analysis, 2 years in a row, I'll be even more worried because we need to work on that. 13% is unacceptable.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's extremely motivational for me personally to make sure that Kindred is part of increasing that number. 13 is way too low, and we need to work on that.
Thank you. You have to wait a little bit because you just have to move a chair. Yep. And then Sarah Holloway, will you please come up again? Sarah, I know that you will put some words on these key findings from Sam. and afterwards we're going to talk a little bit more, and you will also be able to ask questions during Menti or the microphone. Sarah?
Thanks. It was really interesting to see that research from NAPA. I think I was quite surprised about how low perception was. And I come from outside the industry, and I probably have a bit of a objective handle on that, and that seems really low to me. I think one of the very interesting things actually that I spotted in that data from Sweden in particular was that people who participate in online gambling are actually showing a sharper decline in positive perception than people who are not. So I think some of the feeling around that they need to get us to know us better may not be so true. It may actually be that people who know this industry well are picking up on something that's making them lose trust, and I think that's something to look at and dig into a bit deeper. I think from my perspective, having worked with lots of different industries and thought about trust in lots of different ways, there are a couple of things I would say about the way that trust is built and the way that consumers respond to organizations trying to build that trust. And the first is something that I've already said earlier, which is that to build trust, you need to be trustworthy. And I'd like to come back to a couple of the comments that the team here made about advertising and things like that, and to say, if you say your advertising stinks, then I believe you. But I also think there is mileage in looking below the surface, because advertising is always an expression of what company culture is like. And if that's a challenging space for you, there's something underneath as well that's worth thinking about to answer the question, why is it that I, as a potential player in the UK, one of those markets, what is it that I can trust about you? Why is it that you're trustworthy to me? And if you can explain that to another human being, you can explain it to a group of human beings who are your players or potential players. But what I wanted to say about trust in general is, I think from my perspective and some research that I've done over the years on brands that really connect with their consumers and potential consumers, is that they've done a couple of things. They've first really understood the critical role that transparency plays with consumers nowadays. And things have changed over the last nearly 100 years since brands first began, sort of in the 1950s, when you first had big box brands who came out and said to the housewives of the world, use our laundry powder. It was very much an unequal relationship. So the brand was up here and the consumer was somewhere down here, because she, and it was almost always a she, was probably not hugely well educated. Back in the 50s, a much lower percentage of the world's population could read and write. So you were able to say, use this will be better for you. And she would say, yes, I will. What's happened since then is that we've had the advent of mass education. We've also had the advent of mass communication, particularly in the last 20 years when we've had the internet, which means that good news travels really fast, but bad news travels really fast as well. And if you can hear about scandals in any walk of life very fast, you can start to form your own opinion, your own educated opinion, because now you can read and write and you're very well educated of what you expect from companies. So consumers today now expect a more adult-to-adult relationship with the brands that they deliver. So they want you to be transparent and honest and to treat them as adults. And I think part of that reason, that need for transparency, is because we are now so transparent about our own lives on social media. We're posting pictures of what we're doing, we're tweeting all the time. So that's just become part of the way that we talk to each other, and we expect brands to talk to us. So the brands that have seen this have really understood that transparency is not just about saying you're committed or having a sustainability report. It's about bringing the right information to people at the point at which they expect to have that information. And a couple of brands who've used transparency really well are people like the clothing company Everlane, who some of you may have ordered from online, where you can find out as you click on your very nice chic new t-shirt exactly what proportion of the cost of that t-shirt went to different people in parts of the supply chain. And the reason that works beautifully for them is because their selling point to consumers is that you can buy high quality clothing from them at a lower price, because they are not going to mess around with middlemen. So that transparency is not only good because it treats their consumers as adults, but it's also good because it really helps them with their core selling point as well. So that's appropriate transparency for them. The other thing I was going to say is that some of the most successful brands in the world have sort of moved beyond that very short-term advertising that you were talking about to say, you know, this is where you need to bet next, this is what you need to do next, and into really growing brand value in different ways. So if you think about someone like Coca-Cola, who don't normally talk about the drink very much, they talk about happiness, that's their thing. McDonald's have moved away over the last few years from just talking about their Happy Meals and selling a Happy Meal and what you can do, into talking about their sourcing or how they treat their people. You know, if you go into McDonald's right now in the UK, what you'll learn is that working at McDonald's is an amazing career with development opportunities, so you get that real feeling that the brand cares. And it's that kind of sophisticated the view on a brand that really helps to build trust, because all of those are things that I care about, and I know the brand cares about them too and has a point of view. So I guess my question or my challenge back to what I've heard is what is it about this industry that is trustworthy to me as a potential player, and where do you think this sort of this bigger brand shape can be? What is it that you stand for? What is it that you can play with that isn't just that very short term, come and play with us, come and play with us?
Let's begin with the first question.
I think for us, or for me and Kindred, I think it's a very, very good point, Sarah, and I think that we still have quite far to go before we're at that place that you just described with certain of the global brands. I think relevance is really a topic that I think we need to look much more into as an industry. I think we already do to a certain extent around the way we advertise in and around sports, because we actually do attempt to be relevant in a context that makes sense for the viewer in that moment. Then the problem sometimes is that we may make the mistake that you just visualized about come in and play here and now, instead of maybe leaving the viewer and the audience with an interesting fact, with an interesting point of view, and maybe a product that makes sense for them, for the viewer at that moment. We don't necessarily have to go all the way and saying, bet now, right? So I think that relevance for me is a really, really strong point, and it makes a lot of sense for us in industry to think that, or maybe rethink that in the way we advertise. I think that would be one point for me at least to start off with.
Well, one point that we just touched upon about esports is actually we see in esports and the target we have there, that we see much more engagement, we see much more share of time and not just share of wallet when we kind of have that dialogue with them. It's actually that we are just not just looking at how to place the next live bet, but also how are the pre-match or the live match and the post-match events coming up, and what is all the buzz about Astralis or other ones coming into the big tournaments, the big masters. So I think that we will see a change when it comes to the next generations of players. I have to say it's a little more difficult to see the future of great expectations, more transparency, and value in casino, because it's an easier way of gambling if you understand why you win, which obviously nobody actually does when you have all the lines in your screen. But I have to say that we do have some sports coming up, like esports, where we actually see that our target groups are much more interested in that closer relationship with the brand than just the bet.
Yeah. And why are you trustworthy? I think you also asked that question.
Again, I think from a Kindred perspective, I think we're very trustworthy because we are on this journey, and we are actually at a place right now where we don't do advertisement that is full of go and do this now, this is the kind of bonus that you will get. We've sort of taken that out of the equation in our advertisement and really begin to think about treating the viewer as an adult, talking to them in eyesight, and really try to be contextual, be relevant. And for casino, to Niels' point, that is a challenge, but at least let's focus on the product, let's focus on what the product can do, what our product can do, and then hopefully start that journey with the potential consumer from that perspective. So really being transparent and maybe taking one step back instead of going straight to an offer or a good campaign or a bonus, etc.
Just a curious question, because when I was driving home yesterday night in my car, I was listening to a channel only with music and commercials, and then there suddenly came up a commercial who said, if it was because Denmark, the national team, is playing against Switzerland this Saturday, and then I was promised a bonus in 400 kroners if I signed in when I think it was 100 kroner from Unibet. Is it possible to have these extreme bonuses and still be relevant?
I think it is possible, but I think we have to be very careful. And what we have done in that specific example is to make sure that it's very easy for the consumer to understand. And I think that that's maybe...
It was very easy.
Yeah, but it's also easy to understand if you would take the next step and go into the site. And I think that is maybe what we've been lacking historically as an industry, that to go through the terms and conditions before you really understood what this was about, you had a 5-page document to go through. So we want to make sure that at least when we have this type of offers, that it's simple and transparent and easy to understand.
Do you agree?
Well, I actually wanted to ask a follow-up question in that specific example, which I don't know the answer to, so it's an open question. But do you think when consumers see things with this promise of a big bonus, do you think that builds trust with them? Or do you think it helps trust decline when they see such a big bonus? And I know my response to that would be, well, that can't possibly be true. That's brilliant. And I think that reaction probably tells you something about it. But does it build trust in your experience?
I think it depends on who potentially are the recipients of that message and that advertisement. I think the majority of the consumers that are within the industry and knows our product, they will quite quickly understand and be familiar with what that offer means. Mm-hmm. If you're not, then I think we need to be more cautious, because if you're not in the industry and you don't know the product, I don't think that necessarily is going to create a lot of trust. But if you talk to the consumer and the segment that we are trying to reach through this advertisement, I think it's not necessarily bad for trust as such. But we've got to be careful.
I'm glad that you say that 400 kroner is a big bonus, because I saw one of our colleagues with 10,000 kroner bonus and 200 free spins last week, and that's absolutely taken it to the max. We have imposed our own limits to that a long time ago, and we hope and we can see that it's a good way of taking more people onto our portfolio and having less people with problem gambling. But I agree that there could be an issue about this. I think the same goes when you go to the supermarket. Butter in Denmark, for some reason, has been on discount for the past year. So I can get 250 grams of butter for like 8 or 10 kroner, which used to be 26. So I'm just waiting for the next promotion to be there, and then I buy the butter I need. But we could see more or less the same, that this is, of course, a matter of mathematics and how we get new clients on board. But that we can see that if we reactivate only through bonuses and not having other loyalty schemes built into our client relationship, we will only have the players waiting for the next big bonus to come up. And that's not a sustainable model in the long run.
And the thing I was going to add to that is to say, I think there are differences in different audiences and what you need to build trust with them. And as you say, if they're very familiar with you, they might find that a very trustworthy thing to say. If they're not familiar with you, it could be one of the things that's fueling that big proportion of people that don't trust the industry because they don't understand where that came from and they therefore don't know what to do with it. But I think all industries have this challenge of different types of consumers, and I think you can lean into a vicious cycle or a virtuous cycle depending on what you decide to do. And a good example of a virtuous cycle is a company called SC Johnson in the US that makes household cleaning products, and they have a commitment to transparency, which means that they put every single product on a separate website that you can go and look up exactly what is in every single one of their products. And what they find is very, very few consumers do that, because I don't know why you'd want to go particularly, but some people do. And they tend to be people with allergies or people who have a values-based reason to choose or not choose something. Very small proportion of their consumers. But what they find with the other consumers is that those who know about it, even if they've never been to that website, the very fact of its existence means that the brand is elevated in their opinion. Because they're doing something good, even if someone doesn't have direct contact with it, they can see, and going back to what I was saying about being human and trustworthy, they can see that somebody is acting well towards somebody else. And so they're prepared to allow that person a little bit more of their trust. And I think it's finding things like that show when you're offering something that is in somebody else's interest and not in your own interest, that's the ultimate test of whether somebody's trustworthy, whether they give you something that means nothing to them but does mean something to you. And that's always challenging in a business context, but it is something that you need to build for a long-term relationship.
Thank you. And I think we have a question in Menti. It's for Niels Erik and Kim, I think. Odset and Unibet are probably the biggest advertisers in Denmark. The population is fed up with betting commercials on TV. Are you planning to reduce your TV spend?
The largest go first.
Yes, we do, because we are finding smarter ways of getting in touch with our audience. We have new media, we have new channels, we have very strong loyalty programs. And what we can see from our qualitative research, and I agree with the person who asked this question, is that the quality and the perception of our TV ads, even though we spend quite a lot on creative development, that the effect is going down, that people get tired and bored, and that they see so many. So we are trying to find new ways to make the best marketing mix, and that includes reducing our TV ad spending, yes.
And I think you won't tell the new ways here, the Kindred.
No, but you can.
Conference.
You'll have my card. I'll make sure you'll be on my loyalty list.
Thank you. Do you want to contribute, Kim?
Short answer, yes. We are definitely looking into it. We also receive the same messages, and we take that quite serious. I think a couple of things that we just need to be cautious of is that potentially we can reduce our TV spend, but if as an industry we just choose another channel, is that then the solution in the long run? I think for us it's about being more relevant and being more segmented to sort of ensure that we actually spend our energy with the relevant people that actually are interested in the messaging that we have to provide. And I think TV increasingly might not be the optimal space to do that in. So that is definitely something we're looking into.
May I add
Yes,
something,
of
which
course.
is, I think there's so much, when you have such a huge marketing spend, there's such an amazing opportunity to be grasped to do good in the world. And something that Janneke from Malta was saying in the regulators panel really struck a chord with me, which was, wouldn't it be lovely if all the creativity that went into these very witty, very insightful adverts could be pumped into something that is more responsible? And I think with having such a huge spend and having such a huge cultural footprint, there's a really exciting opportunity for people to grasp, if they want to get out there and use the same amount of creativity, the same amount of insight for things that really do good and that wouldn't challenge people to ask questions like this and say, well, everybody's getting really fed up with this. Actually, they could be something that people look forward to because they really say something to them that's beyond just advertising what's happening, but it really strikes a chord with them and shows that they're the positive contribution that's being made.
One last question from the room. Can we have a microphone over here?
Thank you. With regard to, well, just reassure Niels that in the UK we have some terrible television advertising around bookmakers. But what's interesting is that they've voluntarily decided to take some of the advertising off around live sport. In a way, that's been a response to the threat of regulation and the figures that Sam came out with about the decline in trust in UK bookmakers. They're trying to sort of head that off. But one of the reasons why there is a decline in trust are the two things that you've mentioned, actually, is the high bonuses, where people sign up for them and then they find that they don't actually get them, or that they come back in free bets or something like that. Yeah. It's just recycled. So they feel let down there. And then there's the issue of the regulatory checks, affordability checks and things like that, only happening when you get a significant win. So you can be playing all the time, putting your money over, and it goes straight out of your account. You get a small win, you get it back the next day. You get a big win, you've got to wait for a week, and then you've got to provide ID and everything like that. So those are the sort of things that operators can really, they can do them voluntarily to improve the trust. And I mean, they're starting to do it in the UK, but far too late as far as I can see. And I can only see that trend that Sam showed us with the figures continuing. But I think if new entrants to which we've got a very mature market, but new entrants to the market, new jurisdictions, if they can learn from that, and if operators, I mean, I was pleased to hear you say you're going to reduce your spend. That I think would go a long way to help build trust.
Yes, I agree, and I think we have to add to that, telling all the good stories about what we are actually doing, instead of just being all the time on the defensive side and see what are we doing about problem gambling, what are we doing about the the mishaps that we have from time to time. I think we do, as an industry, have a joint interest in telling some of the good stories, and I'm very sorry to hear that you don't get your big prizes immediately after you won. I just sent a check for a guy yesterday for 17.5 million. It took him about 10 minutes to cash out. So you're welcome at Danske Spil.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam, for your analysis. Thank you for your contribution, Sarah, Niels Erik, and Kim. Thank you.
Thank you.
Earlier today, Clément in the regulators panel asked, is the gambling industry a drug industry or an entertainment industry? For most people, it is an entertainment industry, and almost all gamblers manage to keep it that way. But the fact is that sometimes gambling turns into problem gambling. And for one of the last conversations here on stage today, we will have visitors who know what that means. I want to welcome Ian Semmel, Director of Gambling Therapy, and Mark Pottersafe, Gambling Manager at Epic Risk Management. And to facilitate this conversation, welcome also to Anna Jein, Sustainable Manager in Kindred Group.
Thank you for that, Heidi Frederikke. Will you take a seat here? All right, almost the end of the day now. I think we'll use this session as an opportunity to try to summarize the day and get your perspectives on what you've learned from today. It's the first time I'm facilitating this conversation, and I've been extremely excited. I think this is such a good way to add some other perspective on the dialogue and the presentations we've had here. So I'm very curious to get your input and your thoughts. Before we start with that, I thought it would be valuable for you to just introduce yourself, tell a little bit about your background on why you're sitting here and what you do today.
I'm Ian Semmel. I've been in the gambling industry for over 40 years. Spent 20 years as a pathological gambler, and the last 20 years in treatment and harm minimisation.
Yeah. And Mark?
I'm Mark Potter. I'm Safer Gambling Manager of Epic Risk Management. I've been doing that for the last 4 or 5 years. Previous to that, I was a professional rugby player in the UK, and through pathological gambling, probably a career didn't end as I would have liked it to.
Yeah.
To say the least.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. So we've heard today a lot of different speakers talk about what it means to be sustainable, different perspectives on how to build relevance and how to add value to community. I'm really curious to hear how you would define the responsibility of the industry. We've heard a couple of presentations from the industry today, but I think it would be good to hear your perspective on that.
I think what's amazing, I've been in this field for 20 odd years and probably started 18, 19 years ago going around to operators and felt like I was getting patted on the head and people just ticking boxes, giving you money or doing whatever you said because they didn't really care. One thing that I've really noticed over the years, and you see it at this conference, I think Mark alluded to it, that we're actually invited to be able to give different views and be involved with operators. People now, like Maris, who helped with this conference on years ago, they actually care, and there's a lot of operators who've got people that care. However, what we need in this industry is consistency. We need consistency with the operators because I'm sick and tired of people that come to us for treatment, depending on who they gamble with, it's depending on how we work with them. We need consistency in the actual gambling tools that are out there around self-exclusion. there's so many different ways. Different operators do it in what I think is a good way. Other operators do it maybe, nearly. So we need consistency in absolutely the whole approach and a set of tools that everybody can use rather than depending on where they go and who they're with. And going back on what the panel was just talking about, I think the challenge the industry have got is to get the customer, the punter, to actually trust the company they're gambling with, not just because they're getting bonuses and however they get the bonuses, but they actually want to gamble with them because they know they're going to get looked after. But how we get that message across, I haven't got a clue.
No.
Yeah,
Mark,
I think trust is a real important thing. Obviously, today's conference has been centred around sort of building relevance, and we've heard from a lot of different sort of treatment providers, we've heard from research and education, and I think for operators it's important to collaborate with all of those. So, for example, we heard a lot from Mark Griffiths around it's important to collaborate around that with it sort of to form the right approach and identify the right trends. It's then important for organisations such as ourselves who go in and we sort of directly work with staff around the effective identification and interaction with customers, which is typically a very difficult thing to do and to do effectively. From then, it's important to have obviously links such as Ian's company with treatment providers for the small percentage of people that sort of slip through the net and in need of that. And all of that, I think, in terms of perception to other people, will give the wider community, media, all of those that sort of tend to have a negative overview of betting operators at the minute. If they see that they're doing these collaborative things, that they're engaging and they're looking to do the sponsorship with football clubs in the right way. And I think the main sort of message for me would be building relevance, but building it in the right way. And by showing, being collaborative, by sort of engaging with all of these sort of research, education and sort of treatment programs and always looking to improve and get better, then the perception will get better. Yeah. I think typically the media has quite a negative view of operators at the moment, and they're probably only interested in the one person out of every X amount of thousand that doesn't get looked after as well as they should. I think the more we can do to sort of put it on the wider community that we are doing positive things and collaborative things and striving to improve all the time, then I think that gradually the perception will change, and that's where there's a big opportunity for operators to engage in some of these sort of harm minimisation projects that Paul talked about before within football, the Derby County guys in the community. So engaging with things like that will just naturally, I suppose, give a better perspective for people. And I think that will be the way to go.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is consistency across operators and looking for those areas where you can, as an operator, build relevance.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And when you talk about building consistency across operators, more from an RG point of view, is what I hear you say. Is that?
Yeah, we're talking about there's so many good tools out there, but you could literally pick one from each company that this is good. I mean, we know how good Kindreds are, and there's 2 or 3 other companies that have been mentioned already today. But if you take a cross-section of them, the tools aren't good enough. They're inconsistent. On some you can self-exclude over the weekend. On some you've got to do a minimum of this time. On some you can't even do it. So we just need a general consistency and a template of what works for people, because we all know we've all got that evidence. So it's just everybody singing from the same hymn sheet, really.
And is that the responsibility of the operator, you feel?
Well, the operators have got the ideal opportunity to do that, haven't they? Because they're the ones who are putting these tools up there. So rather than playing it, I think the ones that aren't, they need to... Maybe what we're talking about today, collaboration. We're all in this together and we all want to look after people.
Yeah, interesting. And just reflecting on the story and your background that you told us now, just be interesting to hear, we've heard some examples today on how industry can build relevance and have impact on local communities. Are there any areas that you feel we haven't talked about? And do you think that from what we've heard today, that's the right direction to go, so to broaden out the approach?
I met Henrik when he's opened this morning. He went on about the sponsorship can do, etc. That was like music. That was news to me. That was music to my ears. I think this sort of stuff, the only thing we know about in the UK is all the good things that come from the lottery. And we don't hear what sponsorship does. We don't hear the positive side of that. And I think we need to sing that and shout that from the rooftops. So at least people are aware of that, that rather than all this negative press we get, the more positivity we get, the more people see that people do care. That, as I said earlier, there are people in place in the responsible gambling teams in most of these companies that we work with that really mean it, that want to make a difference. And if we all want to make a difference, then we will, surely.
I suppose I think it's great to have all these collaborative things as well that we've talked about. I also think it's really important to actually look after the customers that we have on our sites as digital operators at the moment. For me, I think, especially if you look at vulnerability, I think what has historically always been the case is in terms of identifying vulnerable patterns of play through triggers and markers of harm, or whatever we like to call them, we typically wait for somebody to show vulnerability before we decide it's time to engage with them and actually ask them are they okay. For me, the way to move forward and protect people is to bring that back a level and build a relationship with a customer from an early stage when everything is done in a controlled environment and everything is comfortable for the customer. If you can build the relationship with the customer and, as Ian says, promote and normalise the use of the great tools that you have access to, promote sort of self-management when everything is comfortable, then everything else after that will be minimised. And if and when people do show some vulnerability, if you have that relationship with the customer and the operator, then it's a far easier conversation to have.
Yeah.
And I think so by being proactive and engaging the customer from an early stage is a lot better than being reactive and waiting for them to show signs of vulnerability before we do something about it.
Yeah.
I just want to add something to what Henrik said, which sort of blew me away. And when he said he'd like to eradicate pathological problem gambling, and then Mark said he don't think you can do that. I don't think we can eradicate it and blow it away, but with all the technology we've got, and with all the infrastructure and all the responsible tools we can have, the face of it should look so different. The harm and the damage that people come to shouldn't be allowed to happen because people can see it, and hopefully people won't get in the situations that Mark and I got in because you can see it before it happens, a bit like Mark's saying.
Yeah.
The interactions can be a lot earlier, so I don't think we'll ever eradicate it, but hopefully we can change what it looks like.
Yeah. And what's the right channel, you think? So you mentioned now being more proactive and starting that engagement earlier.
Yeah.
And we've talked about advertisement today. There's a one-to-one
I think it's all
communication.
encompassing responsible advertising, responsible marketing, the way we look after our customers on our sites, the promotions and the use of bonuses. So looking after one of those things will not prevent problem gambling. It's about building enough sort of barriers and enough brick walls to stop people from being able to get to the end where they're showing signs of vulnerability. I mean, if I look back to my own sort of behaviours, I think a lot of the triggers and the markers that we look at are financial based. But if I look back and all of the things that I regret of the things that I did, and there are a lot, the money and the financial stuff is probably at the bottom. Through doing what I did and never being able to understand and get an understanding of what my relationship was with it, my rugby career didn't go as I wanted it to. I missed my daughter's birth. Things like that are far more regretful than any money that you could ever sort of... It comes and goes. Those memories and things, events that you miss because of it are the most important things. And that, I think, is why we need to make sure that we're looking after people from an early stage. And I think that is really important in terms of minimising problem gambling.
Yeah. Thank you. If you were to reflect back on the day now, you've highlighted a couple of examples. If you mention two main takeaways or two things that have surprised you the most, or that you're
one of the things
that
that didn't surprise me, but I was really pleased, was that there's a lot of people in this room that care, that want the customer journey to be safe. There's been a lot of talk about advertising. One of the things I'd like to see with advertising, perhaps to have more responsible gambling adverts. I know there's never going to be as many as the ones that promote gambling, but just to make people aware of if they need help, what help is out there, or responsible gambling messages, more of that. I think that would be really useful. And just every presentation was full of hope. Everybody, they want hope if they're gambling, hope they've got a problem with gambling. As long as there's always hope and we're all going to work together, and when you get a cross-section of people in this room that can all talk and work together, then there's hope for the future of this industry.
It's good to hear.
Yeah,
Mark,
I think
anything?
just to sort of, I think that a thing that's come up regularly as I was listening to the day is that there is, and historically has been, a lack of trust in betting operators. And I think the more that we can showcase these events where we can listen to the researchers and the fact that operators are collaborating with them, the fact that they're collaborating with organisations such as ours in terms of providing training for staff, the fact that they're collaborating with organisations such as Ian's, that the engaging with treatment providers, all of those, that they're engaging the community projects, the football programmes. I think it needs just to be a sort of an all-encompassing showcase of the good around it, rather than what is historically happens is all that gets said about it is the bad things that can happen. And I think that's the thing that I will take away today, that there are a lot of good things that are happening. It's just showcasing them in the right way, at the right time, to the right people. And then I think we can probably move forward in a positive way, sustainably.
Yeah. Is there anything that you had hoped we were going to talk about today that we haven't touched upon? Anything you're missing from the conversation?
I think the conversation's been great. I think what I want to see taken forward from this is some of the ideas that have come out, some of the things we're talking about, consistency around tools, consistency around how people look after people. We need to all sit down together and make sure this happens, rather than be sitting here next year saying the same thing wouldn't be a good idea if the operators here and this whole industry has got a fantastic opportunity now. I think as Henrik was saying, they've come a long way, but there's still a long way to go, but let's get there.
Yeah. Fantastic.
I just think this just showcases this even of importance of building sustainability and building trust and recognising those relationships, and it's sort of all of that enforces the need to have all of our processes in place through advertising, through looking after customers, through identification, through talking to them, through sort of giving them the right sort of streamlines to treatment as and when needed. It just get that overall base that every base is covered, and the more bases we cover, as I say, the more barriers we can put in place, the more we can promote the use of tools, then the more harm we will minimise. I actually don't probably think that gambling-related harm will ever fully go away. Just as if you shut every pub tomorrow, there would still be alcoholics. But the more we can do and the more proactive we can be, then the less likely it is to happen. And I think by engaging at an early stage is the best way of doing it, and building relationships.
So earlier conversations and more focus on working across, not just working across the industry, but operators collaborating as well.
We shouldn't have a situation where one operator is better than another one is. We need to all be singing from the same hymn sheet, especially with responsible gambling tools.
Yeah, an industry standard for responsible gambling.
In an ideal world.
Let's go for it.
Yeah.
That would be the way to go.
All right. Thank you so much, both of you, for adding your reflections and insights on the topics we've talked about today.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming here.
No problem.
Thank you, Ian, Mark, and Anna. Today we have fed our brains with a lot of vitamins and minerals, and we will leave this room with new knowledge and new inspiration. And now I want you to use Menti for the last time today, because I want you to write the word that defines what you take with you today. I think it's very positive words we see here today. These are your words, and now I would like a woman to come on stage to say the last words of today. Anna Jein, will you please come back on stage? And actually, I would like you, all of you, to give her a big applause because she has been behind this whole day and has arranged almost everything. Thank you,
With a
Anna.
big team.
Thank you.
With a very big team behind me, just to make that clear. So I hope you've all had a great day. I hope you've had an informative day, that you walk away with some new insights and some new input that you can use in your daily work. I will be the last thing standing between you and a bit of mingle time now. So I'll just spend 5-10 minutes to try to pull out some of the key takeaways as I've heard them today. First of all, I just want to mention that I've been in the industry for around 9 years now and kind of been through an incredible journey with the industry, and I am so happy and I find it extremely uplifting and positive to see so many people from almost every part of our industry gather again this year. This is the 4th year, as we've heard a couple of times, and we attract a broader and broader group of people, which I find very positive and a good sign that we all want to collaborate. We all want to drive the industry towards a more transparent industry and towards a sustainable industry. So some of the key highlights for me from today, we've just heard from NEPA that the public perception of our industry is deteriorating, which is of course extremely alarming. It's something we need to manage. It's something we need to manage as an industry together. We heard Kim and Nils comment on that, and also some really good input from Sarah. I think one of my key quotes from today has actually been from Sarah, talking about how important it is that we as an industry take a responsibility for how we frame our industry, so that we don't let other people frame it for us. And we've heard some really good case stories today on how we can frame the work we do, how we can be more relevant in societies. We heard from Adele Duncan, who was in the other room in here, how she sees some great opportunities for collaboration between charities and the industry, something I think we need to add a lot more focus on. We spoke about it last year in Stockholm as well, how we can collaborate across different institutions in the industry. I think we've heard some extremely good examples here in this room from EFDN, the European Football Development Network, and also from Derby County Football Club, both talking about how can we look at using sports as a vehicle to do good. How can we see positive impact in these collaborations that has traditionally been very focused around advertisement and around marketing. So I think that's really good input for the entire industry to go home and think about how can we use the power of, for example, sponsorships to be relevant in society and to build some value into our local communities. We've also heard a number of researchers talking today. So as previous years, I think we've had some really interesting, very relevant updates. Mark speaking this morning about advertisements' effect on problem gambling is definitely something I will take with me and work on. And I think we spoke about that last year as well. We hear so many great findings. We have a lot of good insights. We're starting to talk together across the industry, but we also need to look at how do we apply these findings in our day-to-day operations, so that it's not just us coming together at conferences talking about great things that we can do, but actually how do we in our day-to-day work implement what we hear on days like today. So finally, if I just highlight some of the key things that I will try to take home with me and implement in my day-to-day work. First of all, we've spoken a lot about transparency, and I think that goes for the entire industry. We need to really think about how can we be more transparent, how can we better explain how we operate so that we can affect the broader public as well with that message. As Sarah mentioned, if we really want to impact how the public sees us, we need to be able to understand what drives the public perception as it is today, and how can we change it. And that's until we've understood and accepted what are the drivers of this negative public perception, we won't be able to change it. So I really hope that this day has given you some insights to implement in your day-to-day work. I also hope it's been an opportunity for you to connect with new people, to reach out to people and organizations you haven't met before. That's what this day is all about, building collaboration across the industry. So I think Heidi Frederikke maybe just want to try to pull some highlights from Karen's illustration as well.
Yes, the illustration. This canvas was blank this morning. Yeah. Now there is a lot of drawings. What have inspired you the most today, Karen?
Well, a lot of it has, and I've tried to capture as much as I can. I was really on hard work with the parallel sessions, but I think I captured most of it thanks to some help from Jens. Well, it was super interesting, and I've been reflecting on my own perception of the gambling industry, of course, as well. I've become much more positive towards the industry from hearing all these reflections today. It's super interesting, and it's very true that you need to be trustworthy and transparent and communicate the change you make in society rather than the money you want to pull out of society, and that's really important. I'm mother of 3 children, 2 boys, so I'm also a target group because I allow them to gamble or not. So that was a key point for me. But yes, I thought great points from Sarah also about what's happening in the world and how we all need to take a responsibility on an individual basis. So yeah, good luck, and I'll cheer for you. Okay.
Thank you, Karen.
Okay, so I think with that, we will close the conference of 2019. Thank you so much to all the speakers. We've had many speakers this year. Thank you to everyone in this room for coming here, for being open for new conversations. So I hope you've learned something. I hope you take something home with you. I hope you've made new connections. You have a final opportunity to do that when we have a mingle outside in a couple of minutes. So take that opportunity to reach out and speak to someone you haven't spoken to yet. Thank you for this year.
That they need to do. I think they need to basically put limits on. So I think what you could do is limit is